and welcome to the She Wins Women, Wealth, Wisdom, and Legacy podcast. I am your host, Carol Eddy in Denver, Colorado, and I'm excited to introduce our guest today, Cameron Crawford. During a preschool soccer game, Cameron's life changed when her 65-year-old mom hinted at Alzheimer's. Instantly joining the 2.5 million adults in the sandwich generation, she navigated the chaos, feeling isolated. Realizing the challenges of creating a care plan, Cameron turned it into a full-time commitment. With nonprofit background, an MBA, and a compassionate heart, she founded Next Step Senior Placement, supporting families when their loved ones can't stay home. As a certified senior advisor and past president of Colorado Placement and Referral Alliance, Cameron is deeply involved in senior care, bringing her passion to life in the Facebook group Aging Parent Tribe, Denver. She believes the caregiver crisis is an opportunity to create communities. So with that, hi Cameron, and welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's fun to have you on. So just to jump right in, can you tell our listeners a little bit about your background and how you got started helping people find the right facility for long-term care and starting the Facebook Aging Parent Tribe Network group?
Sure. Well, and you summed up everything really well. And your intro made me teary. So when my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's about 17 years ago, we were able to keep her, everything was going pretty well at home for a while. And then she had a big decline. And so when that happened, I didn't know anything. And back then you couldn't search the internet and get a lot of resources. There just weren't things available. And I called an online source to give me ideas, and they referred me to a place close to my house that I knew had a bad reputation. And I even asked the guy, I said, I've always been a researcher. That's just my personality. And I'm like, I've researched that place and the reputation's really bad. Why would you refer me there? And he's like, well, I've never been there. And I'm like, you've never been there. Where do you live? And he lived out of state. And I'm like, I can Google. I know what's close to my house. What I want is somebody to walk beside me that knows more than I do. And I think I was so young when my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's that none of my friends were going through this. So my friends weren't my support group and tribe. And I desperately longed to have someone that was a few steps ahead of me that I could ask questions to. And so I did two things. I started my business to be that person for other people. So since my mom was so young when she was diagnosed, I'm a few years ahead of most of my friends. And so now they're entering that stage of life where they're looking for their parents. And I've been in the trenches for a while. And so I want to be that support. I say, I'm going to be your best friend. I'm going to be the big sister you want to have. And I'm also going to be the professional with all the resources. My business job is that I help people find independent, assisted, and memory care options that fit. But then I also wanted something that was just like a community to support me. And so we started the Aging Parent Tribe, and it's a Facebook group. And it has become, I wake up in the morning and I can see there's caregivers on there that have been waking up at nights, stressing. They are waking up overwhelmed with what's going on, crying. They are not sure what to do. And someone will be posting at 3 a.m. What do I do with my mom? Or I just got a call from the police, or my mom just fell. What do I do? And someone else will be on there that can give them good advice and are a few steps ahead, or just sympathetic and empathetic and letting them know that they're not alone in this journey.
Yeah, I just heard you say getting the right fit. And I think that is the key to what you do so well. Can you go in a little more depth about how you make sure it's a good fit for each client? Because it ranges so much, and to help them know where to start and narrow it down quickly versus them being completely out on their own and just trying to figure it out themselves.
Yes. And that's how we met, is that you were a power of attorney for a woman, and I was able to help you. And when you're looking for a place for someone to live, there's some driving factors. You always have to look at the finances. And so that's just something that you can't ignore and you have to take into account, because the last thing you need to do is add more stress to your life by not understanding what the finances are and what would be a good fit for somebody financially. You have to look at the care needs. And the interesting thing is there are a lot of places that say memory care, but they are not all the same. And memory care can be kind of like a light memory care. And then there's some places that that's their reputation, is they do a very high level of memory care. And so you need to have a good understanding and a realistic understanding of what somebody's care needs actually are, and find the community that fits those. And if somebody just needs meals or transportation, there are a lot of places that can do that. But if somebody has real specific care needs or there's certain concerns, there's only certain communities that have the reputation of doing that well. And so it's important to know what the care history is, and to know who's running a place, to know how many executive directors have been there recently. There's some that they turn over executive directors like more than I change my outfits. So those are red flags. And so what are red flags? Because it costs money to move into a community. It costs money to put down the fees, to make the move, to make that transition. So if you can do it right the first time, it's going to benefit not only the person because it's a good fit for their care needs and their personality, but you're also saving money because you're not having to move to a place because you made a wrong choice the first time.
Yeah, and I think it's just so critical, and I can speak for my interactions with you and having to place somebody. It just narrowed it down so quickly, and it was so easy to get the job done and get her transitioned, and she was in the right place. And thank you enough I'm so glad I'd met you before that I knew you were out there when I needed it. So
well, she picked her power of attorney well. She was very fortunate to have you to
thank
do
you.
that for her.
So tell us, what are some of the most common issues you help clients with in your practice?
It's actually going to go back to those things that we just talked about. It's going to go back to finances. It's going to go back to care needs. And then a lot of times communication with the family, because a lot of times families have avoided talking about specific hard conversations their whole lives. And so then all of a sudden, chaos, or something happens, a health issue, a change, and you are forced to have really difficult conversations about everything you've avoided talking about. And so that goes to finances. A lot of times people are, which I understand, it's paralyzing when you look at the prices of things and you're like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And so I'm just going to ignore it and put it off as long as possible. But if we plan ahead, a lot of times you can work with somebody with low finances and figure out different living options or different ways to support them. And so if somebody's finances are low, instead of putting it off and waiting until there's a crisis and then trying to solve the problem, if you can plan ahead a little bit, you just have a lot better options. And what I do is I'm not a financial planner like you, but let's look at an idea of what are your overall finances? What's your monthly income? What are your assets? If they're not large, that's okay. We can find a place that fits that and have a plan. And then if you have all the money in the world, we can do that too. But it's important. And so a lot of times when people come to me, they're not even sure what their finances are. Or if it's their parents, a lot of times parents are so private with that information and they just don't know. So that's one of the first things we look at is what are the finances?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. And regarding finances, what have you seen regarding increases in costs of care each year?
When I started about 7 years ago, the average increase was 3 to 5%, and 5% was high. And then there was this thing called COVID. I don't know if you heard of it.
No.
And it changed everything. In the first year of COVID, nobody increased their prices because everything was just chaos and hemorrhaging, and we're just trying to get things done. And so then the next year, they really had to increase a lot because caregiver costs had gone up, food costs had gone up. They're having to pay people more just to get caregivers and staff because they're competing with McDonald's down the street that is paying people $20 an hour. And so the increases the year after that were really high. And some places went up there were some places that went up 20%, which
Oh my
is
gosh.
astronomical. I feel like we've balanced out. And so the average now is about 5 to 7%. Some places will be higher and some places will be lower. But that's the average right now, is about expecting an increase of 5 to 7% a year.
Yeah. And I think if people can't anticipate that, it's a big shock. All of a sudden, we could afford what we started with. We can't afford it now. What do we do?
Yes.
So again, they call you.
They call me. Yep. I say nobody ever calls me on a good day. They're only call when there's something that's happened and there's a lot of stress and overwhelm going around with that.
Yeah. So what are some common misconceptions about Medicaid and long-term care coverage for seniors? People often have questions. I see on your Aging Parent Tribe that they're very confused on how to get into Medicaid and
yes,
how that all works.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you're asking that, because again, if we're looking at somebody who doesn't have a lot of money, that's okay. Let's plan for it ahead of time so we're not scrambling at the end. The first thing to know is that Medicare and Medicaid are different.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I don't know why the words are similar, but it's very confusing to people. And Medicare is just going to be their insurance, and that does not cover anybody's assisted living. It will cover when they're in the hospital. It will cover when they go to rehab, but it doesn't cover any type of senior living. And so people always
or even in-home care.
Yeah, or in-home
Unless
care.
it's related to rehab.
We have Medicare, and I'm like, that's great. You and everybody else has Medicare, and it's unfortunately not going to pay for any of this. Now, Medicaid can pay for senior living if you qualify for it. And you have to qualify financially, and you have to, it is back to those two main things. You have to qualify financially, and you have to qualify with your care needs. One of the things I love telling people is that if you are a spouse that's healthy and the other spouse has care needs that you're concerned about, you do not have to divorce them to have them go on Medicaid. They'll be like, maybe we need to get divorced. I'm like, nope, you don't have to do that. You do not have to sell the house and the car are exempt when people are looking at what qualifies as an asset to qualify for Medicaid. And then if you're working with somebody, they can help you transfer the assets to the healthy spouse so that the spouse that has care needs can go on Medicaid and get that help. And so it's something I recommend that you are living off of just your Social Security income. If you are lower income and you're concerned about it, then we want to go ahead and start planning for that and plan to apply for Medicaid when you qualify for it, because in Colorado, it's taking people 6 to 9 months to qualify for it. So once you get the application in, you're not going to see the benefits and you're not going to be approved for it for at least 6 to 9 months. So if you can start earlier, then you're not waiting for a horrible situation where you're all of a sudden you need that money or you need that care. So start planning ahead of time. And I recommend working with a professional to get qualified and to fill out the application. I'm a DIY kind of gal, and you can tell because my kitchen that I tried to DIY it does not look like HGTV. And it's definitely not perfect. When people try to DIY Medicaid, about 71% of them get turned down the first time. And that is money from your pocket that you are having to pay out for care. And so even though it costs money to hire somebody to apply for Medicaid, I think it's always worth the money to hire
somebody. Is that an attorney or is that someone else?
Ooh, that's a good question. So now your typical estate attorney does not do Medicaid and
Right.
does not have a great understanding of Medicaid. There are some attorneys that specialize in it,
Mhm.
and they're good to use, but you want to make sure you're working with somebody that regularly does Medicaid
Yeah.
applications, because it's very niche and very specific. However, there are also people that are not attorneys but are Medicaid planners, and that's all they do. Now, the
Wow.
advantage to working with one of them is sometimes it's less expensive than a attorney. But then, as one of the attorneys told me, he said, "You know what? I do about 5 of these a year. A Medicaid specialist is doing 10 of these a month." And so
Yeah.
they have the relationships, they know how to do it, and that's all they focus on. And so I think a lot of times somebody that's a Medicaid advisor can be as good, if not better, than a Medicaid attorney.
Yeah, and I think the only time where you bring in the attorney is where you're really trying to protect the assets for a spouse or for the next generation, because there's a lot of planning that goes into that, and you have to be very careful. There are a lot of rules.
And if somebody has super high care needs and it looks like they are going to end up in skilled nursing, and it could be if they're an insulin diabetic, it could be that they have a feeding tube, but the path is probably that they're going to need skilled nursing. Skilled nursing is at least $12,000 a month. So it's a lot of money. And most skilled nursings, not all, but most of them will take Medicaid. And so even someone that has a lot of assets, $500,000, $800,000, if you work with an attorney or a Medicaid advisor that specializes in asset protection, they can get you on Medicaid quicker, and then they can preserve some of those assets so that you're not having to spend all of your money down to $2,000 to get care. So a man I worked with, he was worth over $1 million, and but he was already in skilled nursing. So we knew he wasn't going anywhere else. He wasn't going to end up in assisted living. His costs were not going to decrease. And he was living in a Medicaid skilled nursing. And I said, if you're going to have to pay for someone to help you protect the assets, but you pay that once, and then you're going to be able to be on Medicaid. And basically, what you're paying for a month of skilled nursing would have paid for you to do this planning. And so you can protect the assets for your family, for yourself to use, but you're not having to pay out of pocket for skilled nursing.
Yeah, it is such a niche in itself. Like you said, getting the right people to help is so critical in that area, I think. And
Mm-hmm.
again, calling you because you're a resource person, you can head them in the right direction.
Yeah.
Can you tell us an example of things going wrong for a client that came to you after the fact?
Yes. Oh, gosh. Sorry. Can you ask that question again? Because I was thinking about something else and I have it written down, but I need to get to my part on there.
That's all right. Basically, give me an example about a client, some things that went wrong before you met somebody that got your help.
Yes. Oh my gosh. First of all, there's this fabulous lady, and she is in her mid 90s, and she was a Pan Am flight attendant. And so she was this beautiful woman that had traveled all over the world and all this. And as she said, my daughter came and stuck me in this place. And so she was literally living in the basement of a community that was, it's not a bad community, but it's a little depressing. And she wasn't engaging with people. She was using a scooter all the time, and she was running out of money. Actually, an attorney called me about her, and she had about $20,000 left before she needed to be on Medicaid. A quick change, because she's running out of money, because the community that her daughter had her go to was only private pay, and she wasn't going to have the money for very long. It just was kind of a depressing place. So we found her a place, and I remember her asking me, she's like, "Why do I have to move?" And I said, you don't want to say, well, you've done what we're all scared of. You've outlived your assets because you're in your mid 90s, and your daughter didn't think you were going to live this long. And But the place that we found her, because people have this fear of Medicaid communities that they're going to be horrible, but they're not. If you're working with the right person that knows what your options are, it's actually this wonderful nonprofit in downtown Denver that we found that is lively. It has amazing activities and a really great support system. And she moved in there, and I went and I decorated her door with Pan Am things before she moved in. And then a few months later, I was back at the community, and the elevator opens up, and this woman beaming, and she's with the caregiver, walks off of the elevator. When I'd seen her at the other place, she was always in her scooter. And I looked at her, and she didn't remember me from Adam, but I remembered her. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you're the famous woman. And she's famous. Why am I famous? And I'm like, because you're the famous Pan Am flight attendant, and you've lived this wonderful life. And she's, I have. How did you know? And I'm like, oh, I met you a few months ago, and I just remember all this about you. What I was so excited with was, first, I love seeing her coming off the elevator walking. So she was in better condition health-wise than when we moved her in. And I loved that she was on her way to see Christmas carolers, and that she was excited about the events there. And I love seeing the staff kind of surround her and caring for her. And so even though we had to move her from a place because she was running out of money, and that was a hard transition, and she didn't really want to move, but the other place wasn't the right fit. And we moved her to a place that was the right fit for her, and she was just blossoming there and doing really well.
That's a great story. It's always nice to see somebody beaming and changing their whole attitude, and because of something that you intervened and could find the right fit.
And I meet people all the time that they don't want to move. And I get that, because moving is hard and it's scary. And it's like when you went to middle school, it feels overwhelming and you don't know who's going to be there and you're a little nervous. And I met on the other end of the spectrum a man. He didn't want to meet with me. He's saying, my daughter's making me talk to you. He was a physician. We met at Panera's. By the time we were leaving, and we talked about not just the things that are forcing him to go, because he really did need somebody to just help with a little bit of care and tweak some things to make him more successful. But we were talking about how when he found out there was 2 men for every 8 women, he was like, seriously? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, I should talk to my doctor about this. And I'm like, I don't need to know that part of it. But I went to go visit him right out. He didn't want to move. He moved in within a month once we went and toured places, and he saw they weren't sad and scary, and that there were other people like him that really, they just need a little extra help to stay independent. And when I stopped in to see him last week, he said, you know, they treat me like a king around here. And I'm like, they do? And he's like, yes. They've asked me to be on the board to help them make sure they have healthy food in the community.
Wow.
But then he was mad because they took hot dogs off the menu. But I'm like, well, maybe because they're trying to be healthy. And he's like, yeah. He's like, I've got a write-in campaign to get hot dogs back on the menu. I'm like, that's great. And he's like, I wish I had done this earlier. So
that's cool. It's always nice to hear people that end up in a really good place.
Yeah.
If you could give our listeners one piece of wisdom from the years you've worked in the senior placement business, what would that be?
The first thing I would do is plan. So if you can plan ahead, that's great. Most people don't. That's just the way it is. But if you can plan ahead and start thinking ahead, figure out who your power of attorneys are. It is so crucial. People do not understand how important having a power of attorney is, and having somebody that will look out for your best interests. If you know, all of a sudden you have a health issue or a stroke and you're not able to make those decisions yourself, plan ahead so then you don't have to worry about it. So first of all, plan. Second of all, share what you planned. It is not helpful to have all of this in place and not tell anybody else about all this wonderful planning you did. If you have kids, let them know what your passwords are and what your accounts are and what your finances are. And I know that so many people are very, very private and protective of this information. But the person that you trust enough to be your POA, you want to make sure to share that information with them. And then, the last one, if you can not look at what's pushing you into making these decisions, all the scary stuff. If you've had health issues, if your spouse is sick and you can't handle that. But if you can look at what are the positives and go into this willing to look at the positives, that will make all the difference in the world. So people that are excited about all of a sudden having poker buddies around that you can play poker every Thursday night, looking at that you're not going to have to, in Colorado, shovel ice and snow. Look at that you've been eating frozen food that you've microwaved, or my parents were eating Arby's every single day. And that's not real healthy for you. No. But that you can look at that you're going to have meals. So look at the positives.
That's great. Is there anything we didn't talk about that you'd like our listeners to know?
I think you covered a lot. I also encourage people to look and find the resources. A lot of times, especially if a family has a veteran in the family, haven't tapped into those resources. And so working with a professional can give you an overview of resources you might be missing. I worked with a family for 2 years who told me that their dad wouldn't qualify for any of the veteran benefits. And so that's okay. We're working with that. And then we were sitting there 2 years later, and the dad mentioned that he had been active duty in Texas. And I'm like, wait a minute. Your daughter's always told me you weren't active duty. Let's go back to that. And he's, oh yeah, I was active duty. He'd been active duty for 3 months. That qualified him for the aid and attendance benefit.
Yeah.
And so that was $2,700 a month that the family could have been using that they hadn't had access to. So talk to a professional that knows what benefits might be available to you, and then look into all of them.
And on the same line of being a resource, is how can listeners contact you or get into the Facebook group?
Sure. So the Facebook group is called Aging Parent Tribe Colorado. And you just go on Facebook and Google it. Over 90% of the people actually are from Colorado, but we have people from other states and even other countries. We vet it pretty carefully. We want you to be in the group for a reason. Scammers and sketchy people out in the world. So Aging Parent Tribe Colorado. You can also go on my website is nextstepssenior.com, and you can contact me through my website or through Facebook.
Thank you so much, Cameron, for your wise words and your great advice. And for all of our listeners, this has been the She Wins, Women, Wealth, Wisdom, and Legacy podcast with Carol Eddy. And our guest today has been Cameron Crawford. Cameron, thanks again for being our guest. As a reminder, the content shared on this podcast is intended for informational and educational purposes only. It does not constitute personalized financial advice. For guidance tailored to your specific situation, please schedule an appointment with me or consult a qualified financial advisor. This is an independent podcast, not affiliated with Money Concepts Capital Corp.